On today's show, free agency is officially open, at least a little bit, as of this Monday evening into Tuesday. And Landry Fields talked to the media in Atlanta before the draft. We'll get into all of that and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1741 of Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you deep in the night here on a Monday evening into Tuesday. And today's podcast is sponsored by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, if you are a new customer, get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet at FanDuel. The place to go is FanDuel.com/lockedon right now to get started. Also want to encourage you at the top of the podcast, as I always do, to make us your first listen each and every day. Please check us out and subscribe to this podcast anywhere you might find podcasts. That includes YouTube on the video side. We also encourage you to like the show each and every episode. Plus, you can subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Overcast, and all of the audio platforms that you might enjoy. I am recording this again on Monday evening into Tuesday. And if you missed it, the NBA season is now officially over. The Celtics won the title on Monday evening. Obviously, a longtime rival of the Hawks, so probably not a whole lot of celebration happening in Hawksland. Obviously, there were some ties to the Hawks, at least former ties to the Hawks with Al Horford. Al got his first title, which is, of course, a nice storyline for those of us that covered Al and followed his career for a long time. But beyond that, the offseason is now officially here. Now, of course, the Hawks have been offseason mode for quite some time. They have the number one overall pick in this class. They already won the lottery. Everyone's kind of been focused on that for a while. But there is a little bit of a practical application I'll get to in a second for why it matters that the season is now officially over as of Monday evening. I will also say, as I record this, we're actually less than 9 days from the NBA draft. I spoke to Sam Vecini of The Athletic on the podcast yesterday. Number one, I encourage you to listen to that episode because it was a lot of fun. And Sam is, for my money, the number one draft analyst on the internet and a fantastic guest always, and also a friend of mine. And really the entire archive of draft preview content that I've been doing, I've been talking to lots of different people in the last, even before the lottery, but tons of stuff since the lottery. And if you're a new listener just finding us, there is quite a backlog of still very relevant podcasts. And I would start with the one with Sam on Monday. But yeah, we're 9 days away and getting closer by the hour. Also, as we'll get into later on in the podcast, Landry Fields, the Hawks general manager, spoke to the media earlier today, Monday, sort of midday. And I will spend the second half of the show talking about what he said, sharing some of the audio from that, and kind of another teaser as we get closer to the draft itself. But first, again, free agency is basically open. And that's kind of the practical application of the season being over now in Hawksland and really for everybody in the entire league, is that there is a new rule in the new CBA that just started, basically, that means that essentially the day after, is the way it's phrased in the CBA, the day after the finals are over, teams could now begin to negotiate with their own free agents. Now, that own part is very important. It's not just a free-for-all. Technically, free agency does not start for the entire league until June 30th. Now, it's been a joke for a while that, free agency is kind of always happening before that date. I'll leave that to the side for right now. But as far as legally is concerned, the Hawks can't call other free agents, but they can talk to their own free agents. And there are 6 of them this time around. Saddiq Bey is the most prominent one of those guys. Vit Krejci, Seth Lundy, Trent Forrest, Wes Matthews, and Dylan Windler are all free agents as of now, basically. As of Tuesday, they can talk to the Hawks about their new contracts. Now, nothing can be signed, but they can verbally agree to a new deal if they want to go ahead and do that. The same thing as when free agency technically opens in late June, early July. Once the moratorium ends in early July is when deals can actually be signed and put pen to paper. But if the Hawks wanted to agree to a deal with Saddiq Bey on Tuesday, they could. Is that likely to happen? I would say probably not, but it's at least possible. And also, we're 12 days away, as I'm recording this podcast, from another kind of set of deadlines on June 29th. That's the last day that the Hawks can offer qualifying offers to Bey, Krejci, and Lundy as potential restricted free agents. Also, it's the last day that Bruno Fernando's contract becomes guaranteed, and then they have to decide on Garrison Matthews' team option by June 29th. So that's after the draft, but the draft is much later this year. There's a very, very narrow band of time between the draft, which is now 2 days, and the start of free agency. So not expecting a ton of fireworks here, but especially for a guy like, let's just say, Vit Krejci, for instance. As we're getting to later on the podcast with Landry Fields, he actually mentioned Vit's name today. Now, Veit is a free agent, but he's restricted. They can bring Veit back. If there was a guy on this list that would not stun me if the Hawks were to come to agreement with, but before the draft or before free agency, it's probably Veit. Sadiq's sort of situation contractually with the injury, unfortunately for him, the torn ACL, I think we'll probably have to wait a while to see what kind of happens there with his market. How healthy is he, medicals, etc. Whereas Veit is a guy that the Hawks, I would say controversially, did not convert to a full-time contract at the end of the season, but they definitely like Veit Krejci. It will shock me if he's not back, and they'll be able to talk to him officially as of Tuesday. From there, before we get to Landry's comments from today, I got lots of questions from listeners about what the Hawks are generally doing in the draft, both before I talked to Sam and after over the weekend. I addressed some of that stuff with Sam on the show yesterday. Keep that in mind. And if you listen to that show, you will know that the consensus in the league is that the Hawks still have not made decisions at this point in time. And while Landry does not have any reason to kind of be specific on his comments today to the media, in fact, it would have been more shocking if he had been candid with the media than he actually was. But put that to the side, he didn't say anything of huge substance about where the Hawks are leaning when it comes to players and how narrow the process is, et cetera. So that's different. On record and off record are different things. But the buzz in the league still is, from Sam and others who report on this stuff even more so than I do, but I have sources around Atlanta in particular, I would say that people are still a little bit in the dark about what the Hawks are going to do. Now, Landry repeatedly talked about how they're going to narrow, how they already have narrowed, and they will continue to narrow their kind of purview of who they're going to draft at number one overall if they were to stay there. But certainly a lot of uncertainty. And while I kind of poked on this yesterday too, there's a large contingent of fans who want to just say, it's Alex Sarr or bust. I can tell you with authority at this point, that is not how the Hawks are viewing this. They are not viewing this as Alex Sarr or bust. There's not a clear tier distinction in the minds of people that I have talked to around the team and around the league in general. So even if you don't agree with that, I'm just telling you what the practical application is right now, and the Hawks are not viewing it that way at this point in time. I also discussed with Sam briefly on the show yesterday that there was some intel point to the Hawks liking Donovan Clingan of UConn, of course, the dominant defensive big man from the reigning two-time champion Huskies. I got some questions over the weekend about UConn head coach Dan Hurley talking to Matt Norlander of CBS in an interview that was not about Clingan at all, but Hurley said, and I'm quoting now from Norlander's story, quote, "Quinn Snyder's a smart guy who I know they really like Donovan, so I was able to talk to them about Donovan," end quote. So there's been some buzz and even some kind of reporting out there that Quinn in particular likes Donovan Clingan. Now, a lot of whispers about that. I think it's probably true at this point. I don't want to tell you with authority that it is, but it's worth noting that, yes, Quinn has a real voice in the process, and he is a prominent, empowered coach, but he is not the GM. This is not like where it was with Bud 6-7 years ago, where he was coach plus GM. Quinn is not making the final decisions on this stuff. So he could have a huge voice. If he loves Donovan, that probably ends up mattering. The Hawks do, again, like Clingan from what I have heard. He's already been in town for a workout, at least reportedly, and I've heard the same. So I also got a lot of questions about, some social media buzz today about the Hawks kind of zeroing in on Clingan a little bit or something to that extent. I wouldn't use the rumor word on that one because it's social media stuff. Like, people hear stuff, and that's fine. To this point, I have not heard that it's definitely going to be Clingan. I got questions about that today. Like, have you seen this? Have you seen this? I think the Hawks like Clingan from what I can gather. I would not go as far as to say that they have zeroed in on Clingan. Sam said on the show yesterday, and what he did say, I'll say this again now, from what I heard, the Hawks would probably be pretty darn happy to get Clingan in a trade down, meaning they get Clingan and something else for that pick. I'm not reporting that, but that's what I've kind of heard would be a positive scenario. Not the only scenario, but a positive scenario for the Hawks at this point in time. But they do like Clingan. We will see what kind of happens from there. But that's kind of where we are on the draft intel side right now. And again, one more plug. Listen to that show with Sam from yesterday. It's a fun list, a little bit longer than usual on our one-part episodes. But I haven't seen him on the show and had to kind of dive in a little bit. And I was blessed to have him give me that much time on the podcast. Okay. Without any further delay, we will get into a word from our sponsors, and our sponsor on today's show is the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Summertime means baseball, basketball, and so much more. You can bet it all at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, if you're a new customer, get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed with FanDuel. That's $200 you can bet to use on everything from WNBA Who's going to hit the ball over the wall in Major League Baseball, and so much more. But all of your favorite players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and much more. The app at FanDuel Sportsbook is really easy to use. They have everything that you need in the sports betting space, from over-unders to money lines, game props, player props, future bets, and so much more. The FanDuel app is safe, it is secure, and they cover the entire range of sports as well. NBA, WNBA, NFL, college football, MLB, college baseball, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, boxing, MMA, and so much more. And now is the best time. Sign up with the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. The place to go is FanDuel.com/lockedon. One more time, just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, before I get to Landry and his comments, a couple more things, kind of just cleaning up the inbox a little bit on some buzzy stuff that's been out there in the ether the last few days. I tracked down where some of it came from, I think, because The Athletic mentioned previous talks between the Hawks and Knicks about DeJounte Murray, and some people that I think kind of misinterpreted that as being talks that were happening now, where my friend Fred Katz, who covers the team very well, the Knicks up there in New York, wrote that up this week about the Hawks and Knicks talking again back in February. And I heard the same back then. They did talk. New York could come reasonably calling again, I would say, on Murray. I've not heard anything fresh on that. They are more tied to some other guys, I would say, right now. But the Knicks do have some flexibility, and they want to get better, and Murray has a good contract. So that's not my favorite spot for DeJounte, like if I'm DeJounte, because I'd rather be a point guard. And, of course, New York is similar to the situation in Atlanta. Now, they were better this year than the Hawks were, for sure, but they have a ball-dominant point guard who is small in Jalen Brunson compared to Trae Young. They're not like the same player, but they're both smaller point guards who are great, star-level players, but are obviously on-ball players who are small, and that kind of pushes DeJounte to the 2, which is not where he's best. But anyway, that's another discussion. I think that Murray, again, is on an appealing contract. It would not shock me if the Knicks were interested still, but that is not what I've necessarily heard right now. It's just this was a write-up from Fred talking about what happened, again, like 4 or 5 months ago at this point. The other one that I'm not really sure where it came from, to be honest with you, but there was kind of a bubble up of Lauri Markkanen talk on social media the last couple of days that I got a lot of questions about on Twitter and DMs and replies, etc. I don't think there's really been any like major mainstream reporting on that front. I know some people maybe have kind of floated that out there, which is okay. Markkanen, just for the record, has 1 year left on his deal. He's actually quite cheap on his deal right now. There's a lot of thought that Utah might actually renegotiate him up salary-wise to extend him. If that happens, he'd be unavailable in trade. And by the way, it wouldn't blow my mind if the Jazz traded Lauri Markkanen, but the asking price would be exceptionally high from what I understand. Number one, he's good. Number two, it's Danny Ainge, who is not shy about valuing his own players. And I'm going to avoid the rabbit hole for the most part, but because we're not to this point or anywhere close to that point right now. But there are really only 4 ways I can see the Hawks getting Lauri Markkanen in a trade. It was a 2-team trade. It would be at least one of Trae, Jalen, DeJounte, or the number 1 pick going out in that trade. At least one of those 4 things. And by the way, just for the record, I would be shocked if they traded Jalen Johnson in any deal, just practically speaking. I'd be very surprised if they traded Trae Young for Lauri Markkanen. That's just where I would be. And by the way, I think they probably have to add something to DeJounte to get Lauri Markkanen. Not a ton, but that's just my opinion. Number 1 pick, we'll see. I'd be kind of surprised by that. But anyway, keep that in mind. Maybe that would be picking up steam at some point. It wouldn't blow me away. And I actually floated on a show. I think it might have been with Tower Jones or somebody recently on the show within the last month. They're like, or maybe it was Andrew Kelly, that Lauri might kind of fit the bill of if they wanted to turn the number 1 overall pick into a player, he might be on that list. I'm not reporting that that's going to happen or that I've heard anything about that. Just kind of more logical. He would be a decent fit in Atlanta next to Jalen Johnson because of his shooting, et cetera. So we'll leave it there for now and move on. But I always want to touch on that because I got a lot of questions in a short period of time about both that DeJounte Knicks thing and Lauri Markkanen buzz. Okay, now let's pivot a little bit to the Landry Fields press conference. If you happen to be a patron of mine on patreon.com/BT Rowland, I actually dropped the entire raw audio. And by the way, that's sickos only. A lot of that is not that particularly interesting, but it's like 25 minutes long. I'm going to do some more clips on that on this show. So let's just say this. Let's just start here. This is what Landry had to say at the very top of the press conference, an opening statement of sorts, and his first media availability to the local media since winning the lottery. It's been a long time. So here's what Landry had to say at the beginning.
It's good to see everyone. To the fathers out there, happy belated Father's Day. This process has been a really fun and energizing one. And our group has done a terrific job, not just recently, but dating all the way back to when a lot of these players for the draft have been in high school, not just as seniors, but as juniors. So it's really cool to see their evolution and how far they've come and just the positions that they put themselves in, and for us to be here and get a chance to see them live and in person and getting to know them through interviews and through just intel assignments has been really, really interesting. But at the same time, there is a great energy around this group for where we're at currently and what we want to continuously do here in Atlanta. So couldn't be more proud of the group, the support that we've had from top down to continue on in this process of building out things. So we're about, a week away, week and a half away. So we'll continue on, but we've definitely gotten closer and further down the line. So we'll be ready next week for the 2 days.
Nothing crazy there, of course, as you might expect, but just sort of how we get into this thing. And now this is the longest clip I'll play for you at this point on the podcast. It kind of sets the tone a little bit. It's more than 2 minutes long. And it's an exchange that features Lauren Williams of the AJC, Landry Fields, of course, and then Zach Klein of WSB. And basically, it just kind of told everyone, including me and everybody else, and not any huge surprise, that it was not going to be a very revelatory press conference in terms of specifics necessarily. Here's what he had to say in that back and forth with Lauren and Zach.
Touching on, you talked about the interviews and getting to know these players. I know discretion has kind of been a big thing for you guys this year, but what has been kind of a common thread with some of the prospects that you guys have been able to bring in?
Common thread has really been about fit. It's been through this past year and a half, really nailing down some characteristics that are important to us. Now, it doesn't necessitate that every single player is going to fit every single one. I mean, like that's a tall task for anybody. But using that as a guiding light and understanding like the who and the ethos that we want to build around here. And it's a continuous process. Like I'll probably always be here saying like we're building and it doesn't matter where we're at from a wins and losses perspective. But that's been the common thread, is just looking at every individual and weighing it against some of these ideals, you could say, and how they fit for us going into the future.
What has jumped out about some of those guys as far as the ethos and who they are?
Yeah, if actually just really like good guys, like good people in this draft. And it doesn't mean like it's not always like that,
right.
But it really has been neat to kind of see, especially the guys that are all projected to be at the top and guys that we've had in, you know, taking them to dinner and speaking with them, whether it's in Chicago, here in the building, on Zoom, elsewhere. I mean, like we've had so many different mediums to do this, and just to get to know them more and more outside of just the intel that you gather around them. It's just some really good guys.
How many guys are we talking about?
Quite a few.
You have a number?
Nope.
How locked in is your board, and what would it take for a player B to jump player A at number one?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say a week ago it was wider than it is now. The board is definitely shaping up, tearing itself out. So in order to be number one, he's just the guy that we see as a great fit for us, not just for the next day, but for the future as well.
How busy is your phone, and when do you expect that to continue to ring? Is it, in your experience, is it the day before, because you guys haven't had a number one, you kind of don't know what you don't know?
Yeah, it's definitely been ringing. I got a little time off yesterday because it was Father's Day, but for the most part, it continuously rings, and you know we make outgoing calls as well just to see what the rest of the landscape is looking like. So,
while I've poked fun at Landry's GM speak in the past, he is very prone to kind of saying nothing and saying lots of words. And by the way, that's kind of part of the job. It can be frustrating, but this is also a spot on the calendar where I think that basically any GM talking to the media on June 17th with the number one overall pick isn't going to say anything. And that's not fun for the media or the fans, and I understand that. But it does Landry no good to say anything specific about any player or any situation. You still have to ask the questions, and they were asked today by the media. Prime example, by the way, is Landry not even being willing to confirm how many prospects that they've worked out at this point in time, much less who those players are or how many players they're considering number one overall. Like, he was cagey, as you might expect, even before the microphones were all on. Like, it is, it was a very clear tone set that there wasn't going to be a whole lot of news breaking going on this Monday. From there, some more audio for you here. there was a thought process, and this has been a topic across the board, both on this podcast and across Hawks landscape, about basically staying put at number one or trading down from number one. And Ken Segura of the AJC asked Landry about trading down, and here's what he had to say about that.
Landry, there's as much of an opportunity as the number one pick is. I think you just look at history, that hasn't always panned out, for teams that have used it. And I'm curious, is there wisdom in trading back just so you can get more chances and hopefully getting one of these picks pans out?
Yeah, so we as a group, we've looked at a ton of different scenarios. Like, if you keep the pick, you try to get back into the draft, you move back, all the things that you're talking about. And with where we're at right now, like, we'll pick one. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it would be wise for us not to go over those scenarios, but there's been a ton that we've gone over, and we'll continuously go over those as well, even ones that, may present later on with, different team talks that we've had.
Would you say you're pretty committed to keeping it?
Yeah, so today, we're planning on picking one.
So if there is news, quote unquote, from this media availability, it's what it's kind of made the rounds after, since between me recording this podcast and the actual availability happening, it's what was said here. Notably, Landry saying that as of Monday, they are planning to use the number one overall pick. Now, he said the same thing, by the way, in a separate interview with old friend Sarah Spencer of the AJC in a one-on-one that he did, I think, right after. But I would just say this, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but what else is Landry going to say? He's not going to come on and basically say, we're going to trade this pick. There's no chance that was ever going to happen. So, yes, it is notable that he said that. At the same time, that's kind of a no duh. And I will just say this, the Hawks are definitely listening to calls. Now, does that mean they're going to trade the pick? No, but it is very widely known that the Hawks are not married to staying number one. I will use the comparison. It's very obvious from last year. The Spurs, it was well known the Spurs were not going to even take your call, basically, on Wemby. And obviously it's different. Wemby's a better prospect than anybody in this class. I think everybody probably knows that at this point in time. But the Hawks are, I'm not going to say that they're open for business and they have to trade the pick, but they are going to be taking calls, and they already have been, and they still will be in the future. And there you go, even though that was kind of the number one, quote unquote, takeaway from the media availability today. We'll have more coming up in a second when it comes to some more nuggets and also some more audio from Landry Fields. But first, a word from our friends at eBay Motors. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors, and passion, drive, and patience are the formula of winning championships, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and also level up to peak performance, whether it's superchargers you're looking for or roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, really anything you're looking for in the car and automobile space, whether you're into speed, power, or style. eBay Motors has you covered across the board. They have over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, and you will always find exactly what you're looking for with eBay Motors. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money's coming back to you, because with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, of course, but you are not burning cash. With all the parts that you need at the price that you're looking for, it is easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win that you are seeking. Keep your ride or die alive right now at ebaymotors.com. One more time, the place to go is ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit is available to its customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, some more brief audio clips before we kind of round it out with some final nuggets I'm not going to play the audio for you on this show. You will hear Lauren Williams of the AJC ask if there's any prospect that has blown Landry and the team away in workouts, and here's that question and answer.
As far as who you've had in for workouts, sorry to go back to that, but has anyone blown you away that you're just kind of like, that's very close to being the guy that we want?
A few different guys, yes.
How do you kind of, along that line, how do you sort of integrate what happens in a individual or a one-on-one workout versus what you see on film over a very large sample size?
Yeah, I like that question, because a guy can come in here and not be great, and I still would make sure our group is really looking at the whole picture. And we have so many different assessment tools for us that it doesn't come down to 45 minutes to an hour of a workout. But it's helpful. It's always just nice to kind of feel their energy amongst the rest of the group in the front office and the coaches and whatever players are here. So it's a nice piece of data, but it doesn't come down to just that.
Landry kind of sidesteps there when it comes to any of that. You also heard my voice there asking a follow-up about workouts and kind of the practical application of how much that weighs. It's interesting to me always, there are teams that very, very much value in-person workouts. and can be really swayed by them. Going back, I can name a few teams. I won't name the teams, but I know some teams have that reputation of being like really swayed by workouts. Some teams will do them and still got to kind of lean much more on the tape. And I kind of lean more towards tape, but there's certainly things that you want to see up close and personal. And also, it's not just workouts. It's something that's a good reminder. There's also kind of more of a extensive interview process. You buy a guy dinner and you kind of see how they interact. And it's a little bit more of a deep dive, like personal thing than it is necessarily the on-court. The on-court matters too, but certainly notable there. And then the last thing I'll play for you is actually a question that I asked about the Hawks. Just practically, it's a kind of a short answer from Landry, but practically the Hawks being out future picks from the DeJounte trade and how they will react to that.
How much do you consider the fact that you are out some picks in the future, like the ones for the DeJounte trade, et cetera?
Yeah.
Like, does that play into the thinking at all as far as making the pick, trading the pick, like future planning?
It's a factor. You have to factor that. When you're not like able to project out, well, if you do this, you have this level of pick. I mean, it's all part of our strategy building process.
All right, so you hear that. And we'll leave it there for the audio. Again, I could probably play the entire thing for you in short bursts, but it was 25 minutes long. And as I said at the very top of this, there really was no news made, I don't think, as far as like big bold letter news. Like, certainly it's interesting. I have listened to the audio now twice in full, having been there the first time, and then listened to it all again and then chopping it up and editing it for this podcast. But, I don't think that Landry said anything crazy. I don't think he said anything super revelatory if you paid attention closely this entire process. But there you go. We'll round it out from here with kind of the stuff that I've not played for you and just some nuggets and takeaways. So Landry said that the Hawks will, quote, have more visits, more phone calls, and more conversations, end quote, this coming week. He talks about diving into all the different players that they're looking at. Again, that is standard practice, I would say, but there's been a lot of attention paid to the Hawks not being kind of finalized right now. That is not out of the ordinary, I would say. And I think that kind of speaks to that. Landry was asked if all the prospects that the Hawks have worked out have come to Atlanta or whether they've actually traveled to see some of them. He said they've actually done both. So there's been some buzz about Alex Sarr, maybe not coming to Atlanta so far. I will not speak with authority because I don't know 100%, and I like to be right when I report things. I have heard Klingon was already here. I have heard Ricochet is either already here or will be here soon. Sarr's a little bit more muddy. Maybe the Hawks went to see him somewhere else. There's obviously a little bit of cloak and dagger here. And just to take you another step back behind the curtain, the Hawks in the last 2 or 3 years before this, maybe even longer than that, have been announcing all of their work. Well, not all their workouts, a lot of their workouts to the media. This year, they've announced 0 of their workouts. Now, that is not crazy. In the pre-Travis Schlenk era, they never announced any workouts. And then Travis kind of opened up the process a little bit. At number 1 overall, it would have been actually a lot more surprising had they announced prospect visits and prospect kind of workouts. But Landry said they've done both. It would not be unprecedented by any means for the Hawks to draft a player at number 1 overall who they have not worked out in person. That has happened many times. I can give you examples. It has happened. So just because a guy has not worked out for the team or that it hasn't been reported, keep that in mind. A lot of workouts happen that are not ever reported. In previous years, the Hawks have been picking, 15th or whatever, and they've had guys in that were never announced, and I knew they came in. Maybe I would have found out after the fact or whatever, but it's this interesting process where it's purposely cloak and dagger, so don't overreact, I would say, to what's been reported and what hasn't been on players coming into Atlanta, or again, if the Hawks went out and visited that player somewhere else. Also, Landry, just not a surprise, but just kind of noting this, that they kind of tailor their workouts to the player, not to the position or the projected position. Like, for instance, Sarr would be a popular one on this because Sarr is a multi-position guy, probably, whereas Klingon is a pure center, Ricochet, more of a forward type, et cetera, other guys. But there you go. I guess a little bit of newsy here, not surprising, but Landry did name Kobe Buffkin, Mo Gay, and Dylan Windler as guys who are going to play in Summer League. That does not mean that is the full list of roster guys who will be there in Summer League. That is who he named. Now, generally speaking, it's first 2 or 3 years in the league, guys who will be there. He did say the number 1 pick, if they make that, will be, the plan would be for that guy to be in Summer League. I think the league would love that as well. So plan on that. But Seth Lundy, for instance, is hurt, and they announced that if people missed that back in May, he had a surgery. He's not going to be available for Summer League. So he would be there normally. He is hurt right now. V. Krejci, I think, has probably graduated from Summer League after 3+ years in the NBA. Keep that in mind. There are all kinds of guys that could maybe be there, et cetera, on the margins. AJ Griffin is one where I would be interested if they want to ask AJ to play. Going into year 3 doesn't always happen for first-round picks. Of course, he had kind of a lost season. TBD on that. But the 3 guys that Landry did name were Kobe, Mo, and Dylan Windler. He did talk about the hire of Ansi Salah for the first time at a press conference. If you missed that earlier in the cycle, they hired Ansi as a general manager, kind of lieutenant to Landry coming from Golden State. He said he fits the culture well. They know each other from San Antonio, where Landry used to be with the Austin Spurs, et cetera. He notes his strengths in strategy and basketball analysis, but that's a hire that was kind of met with a lot of acclaim, actually, around the league. Ansi Salah has a great reputation, and the first time that Landry was actually asked about that on the record that I'm aware of. My pal Kevin Chenard asked about the challenges of blending the timelines together. We talk about a team that's trying to win now and number 1 overall. No specifics, I would say, from Landry there, but they do want to set it up where they can sustain long term. That's a question that I would love to get a truth serum answer on. Like, how much does that play in to the Hawks thinking that they are trying to win now versus trying to prolong whatever windows, et cetera. Interesting kind of, and something I talked about with Sam yesterday. Like, it's not just the pick in a vacuum. It's the backcourt and the center spot and like where do they try to go? Are they willing to spend more money? All those things kind of filter into different decisions. They're not, any of those are made in a vacuum. Terrence Moore actually asked who was making the final decision on the draft pick. Landry said that he was, unsurprisingly, and then Terrence said, and I quote, "Not Tony?" ? And then Landry said again that he was. This is one of those things that outsiders, including me, will never truly know, but also something that Landry has to say whether it's true or not. So like Landry can't say, no, Tony's making the pick, even if that's the case. And I'm not saying he is, but this is one of those interesting scenarios where like Wrestler is if you missed this in the past, Tony is a very hands-on owner. And at times he's kind of owned it a little bit more than other times where Tony has said flatly that he is the final decision maker on everything. But other times he'll kind of defer more, at least in on-the-record interviews, to his general manager or president of basketball operations. Landry is number 1 on the basketball operations list, but in the end, Tony can, if he wants to, overrule Landry. So one of those interesting kind of back and forths. But obviously, Landry really can't practically say that Tony is the final say on a draft pick. That's the way this goes. Despite it being clear that Landry was not going to talk about players, he did get a question about Alex Sarr's game. He kind of laughingly said he's a good player who was projected pretty high from what he understands. Clearly a non-answer there, but Landry was never going to speak about anybody's strengths and weaknesses. Like, there's no incentive to do that in this setting. He referred a few times to the new cap environment, kind of vaguely, not specifically, but it certainly has to be in his head with the team's financial constraints from the past. I've done a few different kind of cap and tax breakdowns on the feeds. If you missed any of that, it is available for you in the last month or so on this same podcast. But the Hawks are already up against and into the tax. And I think Landry's kind of referring to those, the first apron, second apron, penalties, all that stuff. Where Tony is willing to go financially is a huge, huge question that we can't answer on the outside. Hopefully Landry knows that already and they can kind of plan for it. But there is a new environment there. On the bright side, it is going to rise very fast with a new TV deal. But in the short term, they're already kind of up against the tax and kind of pressed there. There was a question that Landry got about the draft kind of being a down draft, which, by the way, is just true. He did say, as he kind of has to, that they're really excited about this pick in the class, and he joked a few times about not giving the pick back and being excited. But, for the most part, the consensus is, it's something that Sam said. A lot of experts I've had on the show in the last 6 weeks have said this. It's basically a draft that, like, once you get past the top 5, it's pretty normal, but the top 5 is obviously weaker. Sam even said that he didn't have a single top tier 1 or tier 2 prospect in this class. It's kind of the consensus in a lot of different ways. And the last thing here, to bring it full circle, I mentioned this earlier about Quinn Snyder, but Landry was actually asked about the process and how much like input Quinn and the coaching staff have. And Landry's, the money phrase was, it is, quote, highly collaborative, end quote. So, does that mean that Quinn's making picks? No, but he does have a voice, and that kind of brings it full circle to Klingon. We will see. I think we're still in the same spot. Again, we're less than 9 days as I'm recording this podcast from the Hawks making the pick or trading the pick, being on the clock. How do you want to put that? And a very big decision in the offing for Atlanta. All right, that's all I have on today's podcast. Please, please, please subscribe to the show. Check out recent episodes with not only Sam Vecini, but Brian Schroeder and Richard Stamen, Bryce Simon, Bryce Hendricks, Stone Hansen. I can go on and on and off. I'm sure I'll ping people also. Plus, the player capsule series with Glenn Willis has been a big hit around the Hawks diehards about all the players on the Hawks roster, and more of that to come. I'll have one-on-one coverage between now and the draft. We still have several more episodes between now and D-Day on Wednesday. So stay tuned, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend, crucially, about the podcast. If you know someone that likes the Hawks, share the podcast with them. I would be very much appreciative of that. Thank you for listening, everybody. I really do appreciate it, and we'll see you all next time.